guys, welcome back to my channel, Ad Maiora. It's Sara Albanese here, and as promised, today I'm going to share something exclusive with all of you, of course. And I can do this thanks to the IBCC Digital Archive, so the International Bomber Command Center Digital Archives, University of Lincoln, one of the leading university in Britain. So I am so proud, I'm so thankful, okay, because they actually chose me, my channel, in order to help and spread the word and actually talk about poems and writings that you can't find anywhere else on the internet, because they were private. They belonged to private collections. They weren't meant to be published, okay? The authors during the Second World War, women, men who served in the Royal Air Force and the Bomber Command specifically, they wrote them in order to cope, in order to survive, okay? So they didn't actually wrote these poems because they wanted to publish them. These writings, this text, belong to private collections for so long, well, 70 years more or less, and until now you could read them only at the IBCC Digital Archive, and thanks to special permissions given by the owners. So it's a great honor, a great responsibility to have the chance and read them for all of you. Today I'm starting with the poem. I talked about that a little in my previous video, which was the introduction to this project. And this poem is a Kaleidoscope, The Morning After. It was written by a flight lieutenant who served Bomber Command, of course, and his name was Anthony Bertrand Joseph Bartlett. He personally gave this text together with two memoirs to the IBCC Digital Archive, and these three documents were then catalogued by Nigel Hawkins. The two memoirs were about, one of them was about a military operation, basically a mine laying operation, while the other one was about something slightly different. So it wasn't about a military operation, it was about sort of an incident that happened during officers' ball, when an officer, flying officer, decided to bare his chest in order to show his war scars to a lady. Now, this is extremely interesting from my point of view, because actually, unconsciously probably, Anthony Bartlett gave us an example of what literature does most of the times. So what is it? When a writer wants actually to convey a message and to talk about catastrophic events, brutality, massacres, something very, very, very strong, they don't usually describe them in a very graphic way. Most of the times they talk about details, about side stories, behaviors, attitudes, something that doesn't create a shock, okay, doesn't cause a shock, okay, in the reader's mind. Because unconsciously, what we do, what humans do, okay, is to basically to protect ourselves, okay, from something that is extremely disturbing. And this provokes a sort of a narcosis of the conscience, okay? And so our minds basically close the gates, and the real aim of conveying that message basically fails. So for these reasons, many authors, like Bertolt Brecht, for example, with his technique of the Entfremdung, so his technique of detachment, or using scenarios or periods that were different from the actual story he wanted to tell. So there are many writers that use, specifically this technique in order to be able to convey a message or to provoke a certain emotion. Obviously, in this case, it happened, it was instinctual. It didn't happen purposefully, But this is exactly what we read here. We talk about the morning after the bombing, or we talked about the accident at the ball, we talk about details. Well, in literature, now this is what more of, we can say, these words are the words of a witness, which is a little bit different, from the text written by a writer with specific techniques. It's different. But anyway, literature in general, writing in general, focuses a lot on details. Details almost always mean more than themselves, because most of the times they are more acceptable for our minds, and that allows us to understand more, of what is behind those details, and in this way we can understand with a clear mind, we can understand, we can contain, huge images, we wouldn't be able, our minds wouldn't be able to accept and to digest and to contain catastrophic images, when they receive them. For this reason, now I'm going to read this poem, and then we'll analyze it together, and we will see some parallels between this author and a writer. I mean, he was a writer, he was a professional, and he was on the other side of the world, of the war for sure. He was Wolfgang Bochert. He belonged to the so-called Trümmerliteratur. The Trümmerliteratur in German is the rebel literature, so the post-war literature in Germany, East Germany in this case. And it often talked about war, bombing, of what was left of the cities, the traumas of the victims or those who survived. And he talks about that in short stories. And we can see how he uses almost the same words as Bartlett. They were on two opposite sides, One was on the plane, the other one was under the bombs, Different places, different perspectives, different points of view, different way, and I mean different aim, different intention while writing, of course, but exactly the same words, same images, same same details, same feelings, because what I really want to convey here is that feelings are universal, Doesn't matter whether you are on one side or the other, some feelings are universal. Fear, grief, hope, illusions, certainties, doubts, alienation, the desire to survive, they are universal. Doesn't matter what color your uniform is. Now let's start reading this poem. I will read it all together, It's a 5-verse poem. It is very direct, very straightforward, very direct. we can see that the lines, the words, sometimes sentences are broken, as it is, as the human spirit is. Okay, the human spirit is broken, and so this is a mirror of his spirit, of his mind, okay, his experience of the individual in this case. Kaleidoscope, the morning after, written by Anthony Bartlett in 1943. Next morning, Earth still revolving, lights before the eyes, fires burning in the mind, still fully clothed on the bed, sprawled. How did we return? Am I still alive? Was it ages I watched? Can't sleep. Breakfast in the mess. No one speaks, no one smiles. 8 hours to forget another nightmare, another night. Dear God, is it real? Now you can see how colloquial it is. It's sort of a soliloquy, okay, it's a sort of a monologue. He's talking probably with himself, and it's very, very, very direct. We can immediately understand what he's talking about, and we can immediately feel what he is feeling. Let's start from the very beginning. Let's start from the title. I talked about that in my previous video, but I will say that again. The image, the metaphor he uses of the kaleidoscope, this is so interesting, so inspiring. So I mean, we can say history, the human life, the individual itself is like a kaleidoscope. So fragmented pieces of glass, okay, because the individual is fragmented, is broken, and so is the world, and so is history, and so are the values, the certainties, okay, they are fragmented, they're broken, okay. And we can move the kaleidoscope and we can see different images. They're never the same, okay? And they're not completely real, they're just illusions somehow. And they're never the same. So what? It's a dream, it's reality, okay? There are so many different lights, so many different perspectives, okay? And there is not just one truth, one image we can say. There are so many, and all of them are true, but no one is. Now, next morning, so as I said before, he's not talking about the event itself, probably because he's not able to, okay? Because as I said before, there is a sort of a narcosis. It's impossible to convey, to explain what you feel during that nightmare. Probably because he just needs to write it now. As I said before, it's coping, okay? So next morning, Earth still revolving, okay? And this is quite, I mean, this reminds us of the idea of the kaleidoscope, okay? When we move it and turn it, so it's a sort of a confusion, of course. It's confusion, and it's a sort of a dreamlike perspective, okay? And the idea of the Earth that actually is spinning is obviously also, or better, we can actually perceive a sort of a disorientation somehow, alienation. Lights before the eyes, and then he says fires burning in the mind. Obviously they are these lights or fires are what is left of bombing and so explosions and everything that happened. But it is also something that happens when flashes and all the stuff you can you see or you think you are actually perceiving when you're unconscious. Okay, so there is this idea of being metaphorically unconscious somehow. And these fires, these flashes, which are memories, of course, but they're kind of, the reality and dream are not extremely defined right now. Okay, they're mixed up, and so obviously there is confusion and this sort of, as I said before, metaphorical unconsciousness, and of course this fires and lights are symbols of war, obviously, but also of recurring thoughts, okay, almost obsessive, traumas, of course, too. Still fully clothed on the bed, sprawled. This is a very interesting choice of words. First of all, he's clothed, okay, so he's still wearing the uniform, the clothes he had while he was flying, okay, the night earlier. And the way he's lying on the bed is, we can say, sort of a messy way, and losing that attitude or that discipline, the military discipline that wanted soldiers, officers to be tidy and well clothed and well dressed and clean and with a specific attitude. All of that was a symbol of discipline, of course, but also of normality, of a purpose. Okay, now all of that has kind of collapsed. Okay, and he is there lying on the bed, sprawled. Okay, so he has lost control of his limbs somehow. He's lying there almost unconscious again, and so he is so similar to the victims of the bombing, the deceased, the dead. Okay, he's not even sure. Okay, he's lost attitude, purpose, but there is also, he's not sure to be alive somehow too. And then again, he asks, how did we return? Am I still alive? And this is exactly what I was saying before. He's not conscious. He doesn't know how they came back, and well, he's talking as if he had actually lost consciousness. Okay, and so the trauma here becomes somehow dormant, or latent, and he can't focus. He's not aware of what happened. Okay, and he is kind of living in this world, in this reality, in this dimension between reality and nightmare. Okay, between consciousness and unconsciousness, and he is not aware. The fact that he is not aware means that he's almost not responsible for what happened. Was it Hades I watched? So he asks himself, he wonders if he actually, if he had found death or seen death, if he had seen death. And the figure he mentions here, Hades, belongs to the Greek mythology, classical mythology. He's not talking about how he's referring to to death. It could be talking about eventually, I don't know, heaven or hell. He doesn't use a religious reference. He chooses, we can say, neutral reference, because mythology, pagan mythology, doesn't have any religious connotation. It's almost a sort of an archetype, we can say so, okay, while talking about death in general. Refusing to talk about religion here, so to pick one, okay, heaven or hell, and so he refuses, obviously unconsciously, okay, it's instinct here, but he doesn't give a moral connotation, good or bad. He just talks about death in general, okay. I can't sleep, says it all, obviously, because there is this confusion, as I said before, the two levels, okay, reality and being awake on one side and living a nightmare on the other side are completely mixed up, okay. Then the fact that he is living this nightmare, and so he is confusing, we can say, being asleep and being awake, and being alive and being dead, okay. The two things are obviously they're obviously linked, and well, all of us who have read Freud or Jung or any other philosopher or doctor who talked about studied psychoanalysis and the whole theories and actual therapies concerning sleep and so on, interpretation of the dreams and so on. They talk about how traumas actually are relieved, okay, well, while asleep somehow. So this mixture of nightmare and reality is, we can say also in this case, it is something typical, okay, of the reality of the development of traumas. And then this is specifically interesting to me. Breakfast in the mess, no one speaks, no one smiles. Do you remember when I mentioned Bochert before, okay? And I talked about his short stories. I talked about this author, Literatur, so the rebel literature, post-war literature, East Germany. There's this short story. It's called Die Küchenuhr in German. In English, it's the kitchen clock. And they have so many points in common. It's incredible. If you have the chance to read that, it's very, very good to read. Basically, Bochert talks about a man after a bombing. His house is destroyed. He's sitting on a bench in the park, and he's talking with two other people, and he's got his kitchen clock in his hands, and it doesn't work anymore because of the bombing, of course. It's the only thing left, okay? And he refuses to accept that the bombing happened, and so he goes back to rituals, to habits, and he talks about his kitchen mess in this case, to eat, the clock, so the time, the habits, the way he found his mom, and it was always sitting there in the same place in the kitchen, and so on and so on. So the idea that habits, everyday life, small details, okay, are necessary, okay, for the human being to cope, to go on, okay, to get over a huge trauma in this case. It is absolutely necessary. This is something the human being has to do, and it is, well, on one side it's an automatism, on the other side it's a way to escape reality, okay? And the fact that in both cases these habits concern eating, okay, so the place where they eat, and that was so important, especially during the war, okay, of all habits, okay, eating was one of the most important, one of the most relevant, okay, and it was also the idea of family they had, okay. In this case, Bartlett was together with the other officers, okay, with other people, other flying officers and so on. In the other case, okay, in Bochert's story, the man was with his family, his mom. So that's the idea of family, of contact, of human contact, of being in touch with the others, sharing something, eating, which is so important during the war, a specific time, okay, in a specific way. So habit, it's something you hang on to in order to survive, okay? It's something you do instinctually. And another point in common, no one speaks, no one smiles. So they are all there doing the same thing for the same reasons, okay? But there is no real exchange. They're not able to talk, they're not able to smile. All of them are closed up in their own minds, in their own stories, because the traumas are obviously universal, but at the same time they're individual. Okay, they're individual before being universal, probably. And so they're stuck somehow, and they can't reach out to others. This is exactly the same things that Bocher says. Exactly the same things. No one talks, no one smiles, because the protagonist of his story tries to talk, tries to find the eyes of the other two people on the bench, and they don't smile, they refuse to watch in the eye. So this is exactly the same thing, okay, exactly the same, which is very, very, very interesting, because they were living the same reality actually, but from two opposite points of view. And we're back to the same idea here, that the common thread that kind of unites people, victims, okay, on one side or the other side of history, is what makes feelings universal. And finally, 8 hours to forget, another nightmare. So we are back to the idea that they had to forget something, and so they don't want to go back to with their memory. They don't want to face it. They don't want to say it was right or wrong. Okay, they just feel the need to forget, and probably they already have, because they're still living this kind of unconscious dimension or whatever. And the fact that they're not able to share means also that sometimes, you know, in the army, or in this case, okay, it was a bomber command, or in any situation, military situation, it's so the team spirit is so important. Okay, the so-called esprit de corps, and they show no team spirit here because they can't. Okay, they're no more together in this. Each one is living his own nightmare. Another nightmare, another night. Dear God, is this real? And this is the whole point. Dear God is, first of all, it's sort of an invocation. It doesn't have a real religious meaning. It doesn't, because he's not actually praying or referring to God as a religious entity. It's just an invocation. And then he asks himself, he wonders whether this thing he was living was real or not. And the first thing that comes to my mind, and probably all of you who follow me and you know that I often mention her, the first writer that comes to my mind is Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt, she was, you know that, a German journalist, essayist. She was Jewish, and she also wrote during, she worked as a journalist, actually as a reporter during the trials in Nuremberg. And yes, when she wrote about the banality of evil, okay, that was exactly what she meant. was no judgment there. She just said, and she was talking about Germany, of course, totalitarianism, etc., etc. But that's exactly the same thing, because it's a universal concept. So the idea is basically that the human being can somehow experience, as I said before, a narcosis of the conscience because of the events, okay, happening around him, because he has to follow orders in this case, because he has to see, to watch things, because he starts accepting small evils, okay, and then they become bigger and bigger, and the human being gets used, more and more used to them, and so he finally doesn't recognize the huge evil. And the whole point here is that the human being is completely unconscious here, is unaware, is not aware. And this is how evil, and I say evil, but it doesn't have a moral connotation in this case, okay? But also important actions, okay, are not perceived as such, because the human being is completely, as I said before, unaware, okay? His experiences this narcosis, and so he doesn't perceive, he can't understand what is real and what is not. Of course, she's talking about the situation in Germany, and it was different from so many reasons. But anyway, she also says this is a universal process. This is something that happens to anyone. Also nowadays, for very, tiny events, okay, compared to what we're talking about, of course, okay. But anyway, it still happens, okay, that accepting things, and those things become part of our lives, then we get used to them, and then we don't find them so bad anymore. This is human, unfortunately. Until, okay, at a certain point you ask yourself, is this real or not? Okay, is this reality? It isn't. Okay, it's a nightmare. Am I living this? I don't remember. I don't know. So this feeling of alienation, okay, is definitely the most striking, okay, message we get from this poem, okay. And that's as I said before, that was it's very direct, okay, and very relatable. And there is absolutely no rhetoric, no propaganda, no nothing. Because as I said before, there was no intent, okay, to publish or to convey a message to the next generations or anything, okay. He was just trying to cope. He was just trying to understand what was happening around him and inside himself. As I said before, this heritage is so moving. It's very, 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 very touching. And that's why we need to approach it with the utter respect for the authors, of course, the families of the authors, because they have decided actually to disclose, okay, these writings, these treasures, this very sensitive pieces of souls, and to us, and we owe them respect. So I hope that was interesting, and I'm sure it was, not just because it was new, okay, but especially because it is so real. When we study literature, we should never forget that people who write most of the times write because they need it. Then of course there are writers, there are poets and professionals, and they use techniques, and we study them, and we analyze them, and yes, currencies and so on, true. but most of the times writing is a way to deal with the reality. And to, well, there are needs, individual needs, or we can say also social needs, and writing is a way to give an answer or ask questions sometimes. It's not up to us to give answers to their questions, but we can share the same questions, okay, and keep them in mind for the present and the future. Thank you so very much for following me. See you again very, very soon on Ad Maiora. Bye!